Good afternoon. My name is Margaret Mueller, and I'm the President and CEO of the Executives Club of Chicago. Welcome to today's program. What a compelling season this has been so far, as we have welcomed visionary leaders across a wide range of industries. We kicked off the season hosting a conversation with Dara Khosrowshahi of Uber on change and innovation coming to Chicago, followed by a panel discussion on cannabis. We spoke to Tom Wilson of Allstate about his focus on company culture, then hosted a group of technology visionaries on Chicago's tech plan, and most recently last week we heard from Jeff Harmening, CEO of General Mills, and Andy Harmening of Huntington National Bank on the meaning of leadership and the growing importance of corporate responsibility. It is our objective at the club to deliver a multifaceted experience to our members and program attendees. Thank you for being part of the conversation with us. Today we are elated to add Chuck Schwab to the list of dynamic speakers here at the club. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to announce our head table guests, many of whom also serve on the board of directors of the Executives Club. Please hold your applause until all have been introduced. First, Deb DeHaas, Vice Chairman and National Managing Partner, Center for Board Effectiveness, Deloitte. John Conroy, Principal, Baker McKenzie. Susan Zetzer, Managing Director, Advisory and Tax Services, KPMG. Charles Schwab, Chairman and Founder, the Charles Schwab Corporation. Tom Ricketts, Executive Chairman, Chicago Cubs. Michael Flannery, CEO, Duchossois Capital Management. Stacy Janiak, Managing Partner and Chief Growth Officer, Deloitte. Dan Ryan, President, Central Region, JLL. Wayne Bush, President, Financial Services and Chicago Office Managing Principal, NTT Data. Kevin Cook, Chief Operating Officer, Edelman Chicago. Marcia Cruzan, Regional President, U.S. Bank. Gail MarksJarvis, Personal Finance Columnist, Reuters, and the moderator for today's discussion. John Martin, CEO Emeritus, Antares Capital. Chris Wright, Managing Director and CEO, ZS. Larry Richmond, Chair, U.S. Region, CIBC. Carl Vanderwilt, Retired Chairman, President, and CEO, SunTrust Bank. Scott Swanson, President, Illinois, PNC. Thank you all for being here today and for all of your support and commitment to the Executives Club of Chicago. Please take your seats. I also want to take a moment to thank all of our generous sponsors. It is with their support that we are able to put on this kind of exceptional programming for you, the Chicagoland business community. First, our platinum sponsor, KPMG. Our gold sponsors, the Chicago Cubs and Discover. Our silver sponsors, Antares and Hirewell, and additional thanks to our media sponsors, the Wall Street Journal and the Chicago Latino Network. Please join me in thanking these companies who made today possible. And most importantly, thank you, members. You are the lifeblood of the Executives Club. The team wakes up every day inspired to serve the members of this storied organization. So thank you so much for being part of the club. So today, as we host Charles Schwab, founder and chairman of the Charles Schwab Corporation, to discuss his recent memoir, Invested, Changing Forever the Way Americans Invest, I am reminded that whether the rhetoric be triumph or failure, a great deal of professional development is aided by understanding the unique experiences of others. We will hear Mr. Schwab talk about his personal journey through both obstacles and successes, all of which helped him create one of the most well-known banks and brokerage firms in the United States. With a mission to make investing more accessible and affordable for all, his professional story has been almost 45 years in the making. It is with certainty that we recognize Schwab as an innovative leader in the financial space, with the customer at the center of all of their initiatives. So in just a few moments, after you have some time to eat your lunch, we will welcome Tom Ricketts, Executive Chairman of the Chicago Cubs and Director of the Executives Club, to introduce our speakers to the stage. I'd like to thank you again for being part of the conversation today. Please enjoy your lunch, and we'll be back in a few moments.
Good afternoon. It's great to see everybody. My name is Tom Ricketts. I'm the Executive Chairman of the Chicago Cubs and on the Board of Directors of the Executive Club. And I am absolutely thrilled to be here today to introduce legendary entrepreneur, family friend, and now author, or has written other books, but author Chuck Schwab. When I woke up this morning, I had three distinct thoughts. Number one was, wow, this is a crappy day, but I can't do much about that. Number 2 was, I'm wearing a suit today. Gosh, I wish I had a really cool Halloween tie. Wish I would have thought about that yesterday, maybe. But the third thought I had was, this is really a great day. I mean, I get to introduce someone that I've looked up to and admired for my entire professional career, and a real legend of the industry. And it made me think of other great days. And you know, I think about great days, and of course, as we all know, the first great day you mentioned is the day you got married. The second great day you always talk about is the day that your children were born. Those are great days, of course. I was thinking about this week, we have some great days. Sunday was the 10th anniversary of buying the Cubs, and Saturday is the 3rd anniversary of winning the World Series. Those are great days. But the great day that really came to mind was May 1st. And, you know, there's a lot of great things about May 1st. When I was a kid, it was May Day. We would make little baskets with flowers and candies and take them around to our neighbors and hang them on the doors. That was great. May Day, as everyone in the Executives Club knows, is International Workers' Day. I'm sure we all celebrate that. And May Day is also the birthday of my sister-in-law and my college roommate. And so those are all great reasons to like May 1st. But a particular May 1st that I look back to is May 1st, 1975. And I'm sure many of the room don't know the significance of that date, but that was the day that stock commissions, the amount you paid to buy or sell a security, became deregulated. Since 1792, since the beginning of the New York Stock Exchange, the New York Stock Exchange controlled commissions, controlled what you had to pay to buy or sell a stock. And over time, as the 60s and 70s started to go through, there was pressure on them to change. And finally, on May 1st, 1975, they made that change. And what that did was it spawned a new generation of securities firms that picked up the term discount broker. Now, I have read Chuck's book, Invested, which is a fabulous book. I hope you all buy it and read it. And he says he doesn't like the term discount broker because it kind of makes it feel like you're getting something less when in fact you're actually getting something more. And I agree with that. But it's the term that became the term that industry used. And that industry spawned a lot of great entrepreneurs. And there's too many to mention, but and I'm sure Chuck knows them all, but maybe like a Leslie Quick from Quick & Riley, or a Larry Waterhouse, started Waterhouse Securities, or you know, Roger Riney started Scottrade. And one of the other entrepreneurs in the industry was my own father, Joe Ricketts, who started a company that eventually became Ameritrade. So all of these guys started all of these companies, and were all very, very successful. But of all those people, there's always been one leader in this industry. And the way that Chuck Schwab has stayed the leader in this industry is always by thinking about what is best for the investor, and then solving for that, and then thinking about how we get there. And when you think that way, and when you put that investor first, and you think about what this industry could be as opposed to what it is, you come up with some amazing insights and some amazing things that have made the industry grow so much. Of course, all of us know that lowering commissions and eventually all the online technology was transformative for the entire industry. Probably fewer of the people in the room remember when Schwab came out with the Schwab One account, or One Schwab account, which is more along the lines of one of the first accounts to integrate brokerage and banking. Chuck was a leader in the mutual fund industry. You know, mutual funds were not widely owned by individual investors 25 years ago. And with OneSource, the mutual fund marketplace that was created by Schwab, further democratized the world of investing. No-fee IRAs for all the people as the IRA accounts were introduced, to be able to have a place where you could put your savings without getting nicked every day by your brokers. But all those were great and always kept Schwab out on the front. Now, Schwab has not stopped innovating. And in fact, most recently, as of last month, Charles Schwab announced that they would eliminate all commissions on equity trades. So it's a great example of putting the investor first. It's a great example of thinking about how the market should be as opposed to the way it is. And it's another thing that's really telling about Chuck and his company is he knew that when he made that announcement that the market was going to react negatively, clearly giving up a revenue stream under seemingly limited pressure from the industry, giving up a revenue stream because he knew it was the right long-term answer. Now, that did hurt Schwab stock pretty substantially on that day, although it's come back some. It also hurt a whole bunch of other stocks, including Ameritrade, and I want to thank Chuck for that today. So, but the fact that we have no commission stock trading is a great thing, and it's really inspired me. And I was talking to Margaret, our fearless leader and CEO, earlier, and she's authorized me to announce that this lunch is free. Everything the Executive Club does for the future is free. Don't pay your dues. It's the way it should be, not the way it is. And we'll just see how the Economics Club responds. So anyway, once again, it is my great honor to introduce Chuck. And I would like to welcome to the stage, first of all, introduce Gail MarksJarvis, who will be with Chuck up here as, is a financial writer, investment guru, author. She's done it all in our space, and one of our own local that has probably done more writing and helping of individual investors than anyone. And so I'd like to bring Gail up. And Charles Schwab, Chuck Schwab, please come up. So in our mantra at the Cubs is, whoops.
That's the mantra.
Always be marketing. And Schwab is actually a sponsor. The Charles Schwab Corp is actually a sponsor of the Cubs. And it'd be wrong of me to let Chuck come in and out of this room without a jersey.
Oh, Tom, thanks so much. What a great introduction. Thanks so much. Yeah. Where are you sitting? What a wonderful introduction. I mean, you could be a fantastic salesman for us, I tell you. But I know your father would be really upset. Joe Ricketts, who's a great friend of mine now, we were deathly competitors for at least 20 years of our existence, but now we're great friends. How was it at the very beginning? Did we have the vision what was going to happen in the next 35 years? No, absolutely not. All we had was a vision. We knew there was a set of investors. I figured about 15% of investors were self-directed, that really were looking for, they had research, they subscribed to a thing like Value Line, or they went to the library, S&P, lots of places to get information, that they simply wanted to do a trade, buy and sell a trade at the lowest possible cost without any interference from a stockbroker or anybody else. They wanted to make their own decisions free of the pressure of a traditional stockbroker. As you know, the brokerage business was always based upon a concept that basically the client really doesn't know what to do, and therefore we need to have terrific salesmen that we hire and train in Wall Street, and we send them out. They have big commissions to be made if they can convince somebody to buy a stock. So they were always in the business of selling great stories. Many of the stories didn't quite work out, if you made a sale to somebody, there was a significant commission at the very top for the broker who was able to sell. So everyone in the business was, if you were successful in our business, you had to be a fantastic salesman. It didn't make any difference whether it was truthful or not, you just had to be able to sell. And so I thought, I'd come up as a financial analyst at the very beginning, and after Stanford Business School and so forth. And I thought eventually, after about 10 years of seeing many of these brokers who had nice people, really nice people, they'd take me to play golf and things of that nature, but they had great stories always, or out to dinner that night. And so that was the relationship being developed. But I thought there was a better way. And so when it became possible, government was talking about fixed rates going away and negotiated rates coming in, that maybe I should change my career trajectory and start a little company that would serve very independent investors. No, we didn't have the big vision, and all we wanted to do is serve the people we knew that were available then. But as we went along, we kept seeing more and more needs for customers, and we kept thinking, what do they sort of like it? And we tested and marketed many things. Some didn't work, many did work.
So the journalist in me really liked the story you told in the book about how you used the press, because when you started out, there was no credibility. I think it was one of your greatest obstacles. And while some CEOs or young executives are afraid of talking to the press because they're afraid of what will happen to them, you wandered right in, and you used the press to tell the story. What's a discount broker? Because it was like, what is a discount broker?
You tell the real story. The real story, that's part of the real, that's part of,
Getting it wrong.
that's part of the real story is what Gail just mentioned. But the other part of the story is we could not afford advertising. It was so expensive. Just buy a 1 column by 3 inches, it was unbelievably expensive. But it was so much more leverage available to us to go out to meet wonderful writers like Gail in Chicago, or many in San Francisco or in New York and all. I have one story in the book about an individual by the name of Dan Dorfman. He didn't believe the story at all. We were having lunch at this very famous club in New York City, and he said, bring over the telephone. Brought over the telephone, and he called Merrill Lynch. What's the rate on this particular thing? And they were way up here. Then he called our office. What's the rate on doing this same thing? It was way down there. Oh my God, I can't believe it. He wrote a syndicated column at that time, I think about 30 different newspapers. I mean, we really hit the big time with that kind of communication going on. And we couldn't afford television. We couldn't afford any of that stuff. So that was the other part of the story.
Did you ever get to the point where you were afraid of the press, or did that beginning assure you that you could count on the press?
Say that again.
Did you ever get to the point where you were afraid of the press, or did your early roots in using the press to create credibility, did that keep you right in there all along?
I think I always found, Gail, that if you're really honest, you can't be afraid of the press. If you ever pull something on them, then you should be afraid of the press. But we were straightforward. We were totally transparent and all the way along. And so I had a great relationship with the press. And I think they began to trust us, too. And they began writing articles that were really convinced people that they ought to try it. And so it was the very beginning. And so we were one of maybe 10 different firms out there that were offering this kind of thing, and some were more efficient than others, and some did a little bit more promotions like our firm, and we grew and grew and grew, kept adding new services along the way, and now today we have millions and millions of clients and almost $4 trillion of client assets with us.
Of course, the other challenge, so you created credibility, you partially created credibility with being out there and talking discount brokers and saying, we don't like the conflicts that exist in the other arrangement. But as you did that, and as you lowered commissions, you also became a pariah on Wall Street.
That's for sure.
Had you anticipated the pushback that you would get there, and how hard that would make it to raise capital?
Gail, she points out a really tough thing for us at the time, and at the time all the way through, frankly. Wall Street saw this emerging competitor. Well, who in the world would they ever want to support or provide capital to? Not us, for sure. And that led 4 or 5 years later to an acquisition that we thought we were going to borrow money from the Bank of America at the time. This is now 1980. And I thought we were going to be successful in the loan to help us grow. We were growing so quickly. We had offices, computers, people, training people, all the things you do when you're growing. And as a result, they liked our business model so much, they started talking about maybe we should buy your company. And here was this little company in San Francisco. We had probably then a couple hundred employees that they wanted to buy. Bank America, of all names, the greatest bank at the time in the world, wanted to buy us. So we finally were seduced into that for a lot of good reasons. Money was one of them. And but the next 4 years it became very, very difficult because of a lot of issues, which I talk about in the book, actually. And we bought the company back in '87. That was really a dramatic time, which you start off with the original story here about '87. So that was a very seminal moment for us.
So I thought your whole discussion about Bank of America was very interesting because what you said is you were still a relatively new businessman, and here's Bank of America. And you mentioned that basically your head was spinning. We're thrilled at the idea. You thought it would give you credibility. You thought it would give you growth. But it turned into a bit of a nightmare instead.
Well, there's no question about our relationship with the Bank of America. It was pretty fantastic in many ways. It did give us enormous credibility, I think, among investors throughout the country that we were associated with, at the time, the largest bank in the country. But then it became very clear the bank fell into some bad times. They had made some loans to Greek shipping companies that sort of went under. The boats were sitting in docks, dry docks someplace. Argentina was falling apart. They had big loans to the countries down in South America. You remember in the 80s, all the banks were in that same boat that was sort of sinking. So they were then, the bank regulators was requiring them to sell some of their assets to reduce their liabilities as such and increase their equity. So they did. And so I raised my hand, would you sell us back to ourselves? And so I went on that path for a couple of years because there were some very technical reasons and reasons for our growth was going to be limited by the virtue of the fact that they couldn't get new ideas through the regulatory people that were really initiated by us because they didn't have adequate capital. So that's why we wanted to spin off, which we finally did in '87. That's one of my favorite chapters is the tsunami of '87. It was very exciting. It was like, I don't know, going to rodeo, I think.
Another thing that I thought was interesting about the chapter of Bank of America is here you are again, a relatively young man in your 40s. You go into the boardroom, and there again, your head is spinning. There's these people with gray hair, blue bloods. It's like, oh my gosh, I have arrived. But then, as Bank of America starts to have its problems, you do your own research, and you think there's problems that aren't being examined. And you try to go to the other board members, and it does not work out. And I think that's a really important lesson here for people who are on boards and how you dealt with that. So could you talk a little bit about that boardroom problem?
Well, at the very beginning, you can imagine top of this enormous building in San Francisco, the tallest building in town, Bank of America building. I'm sure you've all seen it. At the very tippy top is the boardroom. So I'm walking in there. We've made the transaction happen. Part of the deal was I go on the bank board. I happen to be the largest shareholder of Bank of America because of the transaction. Sounds great, but I only had 1% of the company. The company had a policy of distributing their shares widely, but I had the largest accumulation. So I had somewhat of a financial position in the thing, and we sat down at our little proper places. The books were engraved in gold, Charles Schwab, and across the way was head of Levi Strauss, another guy, the head of the telephone company, another head of the newspapers, and go on and on. People, some guy with the Federal Reserve Board had just retired. McNamara, I don't know if you know, Robert McNamara was on the board, very famous name back in that time period. So I was really somewhat intimidated, to say the least. So I kept my mouth shut for the first few meetings. And then as we got into it, I just felt that these people really weren't getting into the real nitty-gritty of the banking business. We were sort of losing share to some of it. That was really obvious. The number of new accounts per office were just terrible. All these numbers that became clearer and clearer to me, which I didn't know before the trade. And so I became rather unhappy about their marketing, about their technology was really, really behind the eight ball. Oh my gosh, their technology was really sad. So there were a lot of things that were coming to my attention, as well as their inability to introduce new ideas and new products and services for their clients. So my frustration was gradually building. And as you mentioned, I did a whole bunch of homework on the books and records. I began to say, we are underperforming. Not only that, we're not reporting correctly. We had many more losses that we had to be recognized and had to be put allowances for because we're overstating our earnings. And that went over like a lead balloon when I told the whole board. It was something that the head of the audit committee thought he was, at the time, he was chairman of Transamerica Company, big insurance operation, the big tall pyramid in San Francisco is the representative of the bank at Transamerica. He was really on my case, negative. He said, we are. But turned out, about 3 months later, the OCC, the Office of Controller of the Currency, came forth and said, you are under-reserved. Guess what? I've been telling that to the board for about 9 months now. So anyway, that's where that irritation came up. And so, like you say, don't be afraid in the board meeting. If you think there's some issue, go to the CEO, go to the head of the audit committee. They may laugh you out, but hopefully you get your questions answered. In my case, they weren't answered, and I was really unhappy about it.
So you decided you needed your freedom. Go back to independence.
I love that.
But it was going to cost you. You had bought the company, or the company had purchased Charles Schwab just 4 years earlier, $52 million. And you agreed to sell it for $280 million.
Bought it back for $280.
And you had to borrow a lot of money.
Well, yeah, as Gail says, we sold it for $52 million, 55, I think it was. And then the stock that we took in the exchange then never saw that price ever after that. Went from there, I think it was 24 down to eventually to 9. So it was a very negative trip in terms of that. But our purchase, when we bought the company back 6 years later, we paid $280 million for the company, which was 6 times what we were paid, 6 or 7 times. But it was worth it. As it turned out, it was worth it. In fact, as I look back, it's one of the best trades I've ever made.
I love the part where you said, though, even as you were signing the papers, buying it back, you were terrified because you had borrowed so much money to do it. And so immediately, you started to work on an IPO in order to get out of the debt. The timing was fortuitous. I'll let Chuck tell you what happened next.
Well, that was September of the same year of '87. As Gail mentioned, I was up to my eyeballs in debt, which I felt really uncomfortable with. I hate debt, frankly. And so I wanted to get rid of a whole lot of it very quickly because I thought the markets were sort of in a vulnerable position. This is now early '87. And so I told the team, I'm changed my mind. We've got to go public. We've got to raise the money to pay off a couple of the banks we borrowed from. And so by September, we were all ready to go, which we did. We came out at $15 a share. And within 2 weeks, that stock was at 6. And I had a lot of unhappy people, a lot of unhappy customers, a lot of unhappy employees. I was in the doghouse. But we raised the money, deleveraged, thank goodness. But then some other things happened. We had, when the crash occurred, we had one nasty, no, he actually was not a bad guy client, but he had lost a lot of money, and we were on the hook for a lot of that money. So the story goes on in the book. Some happens to be involved with the CBOE right here in town. So when the CBOE was shut down for like a day or I don't know how many hours, we couldn't price the account. It put us really in terrible jeopardy. He was in Hong Kong. He was a large investor in Hong Kong, a real estate man, but he had a number of portfolios, $100 million portfolios in America, but he was selling covered puts. And those of you in the option business know what that means in a down market that's going down 20% in a day. Those puts went straight up. And you can imagine he didn't have the margin to cover them. It was losses for him. When it goes straight up and you're selling, he was making income off of it, but when it went straight up, he was losing money. So he wiped out his equity. And we had to chase him down. It was an interesting story, but it all worked out.
You suffered through a lot of bear markets. And I think, that people have the illusion sometimes that people who are in the investing business can see a bear market coming and know when to get out of the way. And so I think it would be really interesting to hear you talk about, there was 87 that we just talked about where the market went down like 23% in a day. And then there were all the others, including 2000, 49% down, 2007, 54% down. In all of those, did you get hints? Did you see things coming that, in retrospect, you could say, it was time to be careful?
Well, here I am at the home of markets, commodity markets, currency markets, option markets. I think we all know the ultimate part of a free market system is they don't go sideways all the time. That's sort of when you're dead, when that monitor goes straight line across. Markets go up and they go down. Greed and fear always wanders along, and the same thing in the stock market. But you can sort of tell when markets are rumbling for different reasons, and so many of us can sort of tell. Looks like things are, but you never know. Nobody ever knows exactly what's going to happen tomorrow. You can do some precautionary things along the way, but through all those markets, and what of course, this is my final book. It's about our story of the company, but I've written 4 other books about how to get rich in the stock market. That's really an overstatement. It's how to be a good investor with good outcomes, but it has nothing to do about getting rich. It's how to make steady income using index funds and things of that nature over time, but be able to handle the emotional difficulties when the market going up, you really are euphoric and you're just so happy, and you talk to your friends and family about how much money you're making, and then all of a sudden things tilt this way. Your conversation becomes less and less. Your depression starts building and building and building, and then finally down here you start, maybe I should sell. Well, guess what happens? A little bit later, a month goes by, and all of a sudden it starts chugging away up. Markets always take a lot longer going up than they go down. They go straight down, and it takes time, maybe a year to recover. But you have to believe in the underlying value of the country, the economic system, one of the greatest systems in the world we have here in America. Capitalism is fantastic. Free market system is fantastic. We got to hang on to it. There's some people out there who like to change everything, but we can do that, talk about that later. And our next political division here, which was after this meeting.
So you just said that you have hints of markets coming to an end, but you never know for sure, and you never know when. So I have to tell you that as I was coming here today, different people knew I was going to be interviewing you. And the first thing they said to me is, ask him if he thinks we're going into a bear market. So I have to do that, even knowing that you just said maybe, maybe not, in terms of knowledge base.
Well, I think the press, I have to say, has been hoping, praying that there would be an economic recession. It's been going on for about 3 years, ever since November of 16. And it just seems as though our economy is so powerful. I think for all of us in the corporate world, that corporate income tax reduction was fantastic. The incentives we have for new equipment and all the reinvestment has been invaluable. It's been invaluable for Schwab, for sure. Our tax rate went from 38 down to 21, plus a few little things in California to add up. But we have poured all kinds of money into reinvestment, new facilities, new computers, and I suspect a lot of people in this very room have enjoyed the same benefits. So business people know it's not that bad. But the press clients keep hoping the recession will occur, but I don't think it's going to occur anytime soon. I'm still very positive.
Well, that's good news. In the good times, do you think that advisors warn people enough about preparing for the bad times?
I think the most astute advisors use the word asset allocation. Let's make sure you have a portfolio that's ironclad. We'll go through thick and thin. When down markets come, you'll go down a little bit, but understand that and understand why you're in a safety zone. You'll have equities, you might have 30 or 40% might be fixed income. They go down maybe a little bit or even might go up if interest rates at that point in time come down. So, but you've got to build a portfolio for the long term. Nothing ever happens overnight. You know, all of you who run business, we're always talking in terms of a year, not a day, not a quarter, not a week, not a month, as we go out and have our salespeople go out and introduce new products, new things. But I have such confidence in our system. I love to say this to groups that, and I didn't originate the whole concept around it, but the word, the definition of capitalism comes from the word caput in Latin, the head. It talks about the head. We have a system that's based upon the head. That's called the human creativity, the human ingenuity, all that stuff. And you can see it. I mean, we were just talking at our table about all the introductions of things in the last 10 or 15 years. For those of us a little bit older, the last 50 years has been unbelievable. There is no stopping to the continuing improvement, whether it's biotechnology, whether it's technology. We will see continuous improvement in our lives. So we're all, guess what, living longer. That's, of course, a huge problem for Social Security. It's a good thing for us brokers because we've got to help people have enough money to live on when they leave their company, have their own paycheck. It's not too good of news if you haven't saved, because the Social Security system is probably going to be about the same and probably won't improve that much. So you got to build up your own wealth while you can, while you still are earning, having a salary and such. But I think the overall economy we have in America is someplace I couldn't have done what I did. Joe Ricketts couldn't have done what he did without being in America. We couldn't have done it in France. We couldn't have done it in Germany. Couldn't have done it in England. There are a few that tried. But I think we have seen what a new emerging industry can do. And my story is all about an entrepreneur starting, but there'll be new entrepreneurs starting today. I know that. I see a lot of them in California. I hope there's some in Chicago.
Oh, yes. We have good entrepreneurs here. So each time one of these bear markets came, it really crippled the business because people would get terrified and they'd walk away. They wouldn't invest, sometimes for years, at the level that they had been before. Do you worry about that now? Do you worry that in the next bear market, now people with 401ks and IRAs, they're much more self-driven than they used to be? Do you worry what the next bear market might do?
Well, it's a psychological thing. My parents lived through the Depression years, and our family was brought up with this great cloud over our head about the next depression. And I knew that I wanted to live a life devoid of all that thought about depression. So I figured out a way to be much more positive and see the more how you get through all this thing, how you can live through even a depression and survive as long as you don't overutilize debt. That's the real killer. You've got to be able to go through these down periods in the market and be able to sustain yourself without the bank taking over. And so that's the most magical thing you could do, is working with your CFO to make sure you don't have too much debt at the wrong time, because then it's all over. But hang in there, and you just got to be believing that the next movement in the economy is going to be up. It has to be up, because we all are demanding things. We as consumers are demanding new things, new products. Some entrepreneur, they'll start a new, whatever it might be, and we'll all rush to it. And so you don't want to be left alone losing your business. You want to be part of the new business.
So the number one question people told me to be sure to ask you was if we were going to a recession or bear market. The number two was there's a lot of intrigue about these new commissions falling to, or the old commissions going to literally zero, which is shocking given the fact that when you started, you were cutting them deeply, just going to 70. So what do these cuts mean? I mean, it's nice for the individual, but what does it mean for the businesses that are facing those? And here's what everyone wanted me to ask. So if you're losing the commissions, where does the revenue come from?
Well, in our case, it would have been disastrous for us to have done it at the very beginning, go to zero. We would have had no money. But over the years, we've been able to diversify the companies extensively, so the immediate reaction for us to go to zero was about 4% loss in revenue. But so over the years, we have mutual funds, we have ETFs, we have a bank, we have lots of different ways. And I always loved the formula of Google. You charge zero for search, and guess what? They're one of the most profitable companies in the world. I'd like to copy them. Not a bad formula to copy. But I think, essentially we'll get more business coming in. We took all the friction out of buying and selling stock, and I think that's good. We were on that ascent for 40 years or 35 years, and we finally decided, let's just go to zero and clean that up, and then make our business based upon relationship, all the things that people would want to have, and take the commission portion out of that relationship. And so we'll make it up on fees that we charge on people who want to use Schwab Private Client. Some people want to borrow money from the bank. Some people want to lend money to the bank. Some people want to buy money funds. We charge a little fee there. Somebody would like to have our ETFs. We charge a little bit there. So we'll do just fine.
I want to go back to another point that I find often in rags to riches stories, and you weren't exactly rags, but you certainly came from a middle-class background to riches. And often in those stories, you see entrepreneurs, and I think people looking to be entrepreneurs thinks it's kind of magic. It just kind of happens. And certainly there's all the grit and the stick-to-itness that you talked about. But how crucial is having someone early on that you can turn to for capital. You mentioned in the book Uncle Bill. He was a businessman who had made money in the lumber industry. You helped him. How crucial is it having someone who can give you that early capital that you know, instead of just begging around to find it?
That's called relationship management. If you have an uncle like that, actually, Bill was a great friend of mine. He had 2 daughters, and I was sort of his son. My dad was the oldest of the family, and he was second or third. So he sort of adopted me in that sense. And I went on his board. He had a wood products company in Red Bluff, California. And I helped him many ways. I was so financially oriented and all that stuff. So he had when he bought a huge bunch of timber, which he needed to do, I helped him find people to put the money up. It was an insurance company to do the transaction. I helped him a lot of decisions along the way. So then at one point he decided he wanted to sell the company. So I helped him with that. So that good deed helped me later on when I said, Bill, this is a funny story though, which is sort of, when I said, Bill, this company is really going fast. We're not quite making much money. We're going to hit break-even point next year. And I want to open an office. We had an office in San Francisco. I want to open an office in Los Angeles. He kept shaking his head. No, can't do it. He said, the choice is this. You've got to come to Sacramento. I want to run the branch in Sacramento. I don't have anything to do now. We just sold the company. And I said, no, we got to go to LA. That's a massive market down there. Kept shaking his head. We opened the office in Sacramento. And it was fantastic in its success. And I said to myself and to him that if we can make it in Sacramento, we can make it in any town in the United States. But that set us on the pursuit to do exactly that. And I find then, and it's still somewhat true today, people love to come into our branches, look around, see who we are, see that we're normal people, and we offer great service now and back then. And they trusted us, but they did most of the business then on the telephone. Now they do it on the computer. And it was a great serendipitous moment when we found out we could do it in Sacramento, we could do it any place.
Great story. One last question. The Ask Chuck. You mentioned, everyone knows Chuck. He's been in advertising for years. It made the firm friendly, appealing, set it aside from others. But you were reluctant at first. You were afraid of what people would think of you if you did that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, that was interesting. At the very beginning, we had this great story written about Schwab in the San Francisco Examiner. This is now 1977. And my guy who ran advertising said, Chuck, our ads are so boring. We got to put something, personality in that thing. And I said, and then they said, well, let's use that picture from that ad, from that story that was talking about. They had me featured. I was leaning over at that time they called it a Bunkeramo machine. It was a quote machine. And I had a big smile, all that. So, okay, Dick, let me talk to my wife about this thing. And I thought, what kind of egomaniac would ever put their picture in a newspaper ad? And, well, my friend's going to think. I had a lot of friends who were still in the brokerage business, played golf with them. What were they going to think? And finally I said, okay, Dick, you can do it once, only once. I'll try it just once, and I'll just take the heat for it. Well, it was about 10 times the results of the old ads that really had no characteristic to them at all. And so that was sort of the beginning, 1977, about me being featured as a personality. And when you think about it, yeah, I think people felt, I know the person running the thing, he looks like a reasonable person, I can trust him, and I think that was a really differentiating moment in time that I put my name out there and face. You could either go to the post office and see the faces up there, and so I didn't want to be up there ever, so I was on Honest John, Honest Chuck. So I think that was really a seminal moment really for the company to put your name and face out there, and I look back on and say, thank you, but I'm not an egomaniac.
Well, thank you for letting us see Chuck now. Wish we could continue more. It's very enlightening and great lessons for entrepreneurs. Please join me in thanking Chuck Schwab.
I'm excited to have the one and only microphone. Gail and Chuck, thank you so much for such a wonderful discussion and your patience with technology. Was there ever a speaker who loved the business of business more than Mr. Schwab? Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susan Zetzer. I'm with KPMG from our smoky San Francisco office. And we at KPMG are very proud to be a sponsor of today's outstanding program. Today's discussion was inspirational, and as I reflect on the conversation after reading the book, I came away with just a few critical thoughts today that I wanted to reemphasize for the group. The first one is relative to technology. Not all of us are as aware of how much the consumer's needs and wants dictate our business. Mr. Schwab obviously caught on to the importance of technology early on. He leveraged that, and may I invite you to consider his business had been running, going, and growing far ahead of the businesses of Mr. McNally or Mr. Gates. So kudos on your swift adoption of technology. Schwab has been an amazing adopter of technology, and they deploy swifter than any other financial services company I have ever seen. It's an amazing thing. The second is think about the long term. Obviously, you've had a number of steps forward, a couple of steps back, but overall, you are looking at a larger picture and how to continue to build your business. And that is something that we all today, we're also caught up in our quarterly earnings and our short-term wins, that it's sometimes hard to see the bigger arc of the business. And I think we see with Schwab, an organization that started out as a small company dedicated to serving perhaps a subsegment of the market, but as your mission became larger, you kept looking at the longer term and building for that. And today, you have an amazing position. And finally, looking at the business and what you want to offer through your user's eyes. All business depends on our customers and being true to what the customers want. And Schwab has stayed true to its mission, and Mr. Schwab's voice is important in that he is always looking at the world through the client's eyes. He prioritizes his technology and his business initiatives for what the clients want and where the market is going, not for an arbitrary product or another offline business that maybe is tangential. He's always looking at the client's eyes, and that is really an important message. If you have not yet read the book, how can that be? We happen to have copies of Mr. Schwab's memoir outside for $29.95. I have read the book. I have found it exceptional, and I invite anybody here who is in the accounting profession to grab a copy of that book, because never was there nicer passages in a book about an auditor than Mr. Schwab has written about Dennis Wu from Deloitte, and I just want to acknowledge that. I want to thank the Executive Club again for allowing KPMG to sponsor this outstanding event and your participation. This is a great organization. I'm in San Francisco, and to be candid, we've got great organizations there too, but nothing exactly like this. It's an amazing way to bring the community together and to hear from the true leaders in business who not only are interested in benefiting the capital markets, but also in benefiting their communities. The proceeds from this book, Invested, and we know there's going to be a lot of them, Chuck, are going to benefit Schwab's programs that support financial literacy. And if you are not aware of them, they are amazing, comprehensive, and something to be incredibly proud of. Thank you all for joining us today at the luncheon, and thank you again, Gail and Chuck.